You're listening to Real Talk, live streaming on Facebook and YouTube. And we are super excited to have Chief Scott Titus in the house today. Uh, and we're going to kind of do a montage of conversations, I guess, with a little bit of referendum talk, a little bit of budget talk, and maybe some Q&A, and also maybe some mental health side, because we've got a great mental health hospital getting ready to open up, and there's some huge advantages for people who are going through different situations out there. That there's some major improvements in our area, I think, that are coming. So how you doing today, Chief?
I'm doing fantastic, John. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. So, let's start out with the budget talks, and and we'll kind of couple those with the referendum too, because I think whether people really realized it or not, I think they kind of go hand in glove.
Sure.
And I don't know that we did a really constructive job explaining that a yes or a no didn't mean yes or no to the projects. It just meant how they were funded. But it also affects the budget side of things too, because we're trying to maintain a millage rate and provide service. And just a few minutes that we spent together prior to the show, there's some real challenges that come with no millage rate increase and service provided to a growing city. So I'm going to kind of let you take the reins here real quick, and you can kind of talk about the millage rate and the budget and the referendums and how you've linked them together.
Well, one thing I don't like to get too far ahead of, the city manager and public messaging and things that are going on, but I will say, having been here the amount of time that I've had, so I'm in my 32nd year, and I have been involved in the budget process for the last 19 years up front in administration.
Yep.
And so, I've seen a lot of different situations and things that have happened over the years. And it's difficult because anytime you look at budget and you look at government, there's elected officials that want to be responsive to their responsibilities to do certain things for the city or the county or the municipality that they're responsible for, the state, federal government, all those things. They want to be responsible as constituents. They also want to be responsible to, having a bigger picture and understanding, and trying to find that balance sometimes is difficult, because you want to be responsive to your voters, but you also want to do the right thing. And so when there's, elected terms, they obviously, people that are in office want to stay in office. They want to be successful. They want to continue being able to get their message out and do things. And, sometimes nobody likes an increase in taxes, right? I think all of us would say, yeah, absolutely. We don't want to pay more money.
Correct.
But if you just think about it in general terms of just what we do as homeowners living in our homes, we've all seen crazy increases since COVID, supply and demand issues and other things that have gone on, leaving politics out of it, just because of things that have happened as far as having a worldwide, pandemic. The supply and demand issues have just gone absolutely crazy and done things to just our regular household income and how we make money and how we spend money. We've seen drastic differences, and it's no different when you're running a business, and it's no different when you're running a government, which is a business. And so if your services are going to stay the same, if you're a steakhouse and you provide premium steaks every night with nice wines and all of these things, and the price of those things go up, you can only absorb so much before either you pass those costs on to people that are frequenting your establishment, or you lower your level of service, right? And so,
Yep.
And sometimes as homeowners, we have to electively say, I don't want this anymore. I'm not going to pay for, I've reduced my cell phone minutes, or I reduced my cable bill. I'm not getting all the streaming channels I used to, or the movie channels, or, we make decisions through at home, just, like we do would in our business, and just like we do in government. Our job is to be responsive, and our commissioners and our city managers is to be responsive to what the community wants, but also with a bigger picture of understanding what the community needs. And I think there's been a lot of discussion, changing the ULDC and changing some of the zoning stuff is because we predominantly have been a residential home community for all of these years as the city has grown, and the residential side of the city has grown in contrast to the commercial or industrial side has grown much more. And so there needs to be an increase in the commercial and industrial side to help alleviate some of the burden, some of the tax burden and financial burden on homeowners. But as we go through that, and until they accomplish that, there's, the pain in between is difficult. So the city's recognized what needs to be done. Changing the ULDC and doing some of that stuff and the rezonings, that was difficult because this community, there are a lot of people in the community that want to be just a residential home community, but they've gotten used to certain levels of service too. And so if you want to have those levels of service and you want to maintain those as the cost goes up for everything, you got to find a way to pay for that. And so the old saying, growth pays for growth, unfortunately, isn't as true as we would all love. And, years ago when they changed minimum wage and they set a target for what that was going to increase to over a number of years, minimum wage was, typically designed to be, high school kids or part-time pay or people that were working to do something that wasn't really supposed to be a living wage. And when they increased that to make that more of a living wage, it pushed costs of everything else up. And then you have, some of those minimum wage jobs are, they're not highly skilled jobs as far as needing a college degree or technical things or something like that. And so then you have other positions in city government or even in private practices, private businesses now that are, you have some of those other entry-level minimum wage jobs now that are making as much money as some of those other things. And so everything kind of gets pushed up. And so I think we're seeing the consequences of a whole lot of things that came together all at once. And so every year we start the budgeting process, really in January is when our budget for the next year starts. We start putting it together. And so we've gone through, several iterations and we're not finished yet. I think the city's still working hard to balance the budget. And we'll have meetings over the next several months until the budget's adopted and figure out where all that lands. But
we talked about this briefly too, but I've had this conversation with City Manager Jerome Fletcher about how we should look at our millage rate. I think for the last 2 or 3 years now, he and I both have been saying I would rather have micro increases than a major increase. We briefly talked about that prior to getting on the show, because most people who know this show know that we kind of go down the path. We don't have, in fact, even today you said, I don't know what we're going to talk about, but I'm sure we'll end up talking about a whole lot. And that's kind of where we go with this, because the realization that a city of our magnitude can continue to march with no adjustment to increase. I would think everybody would like to have a micro increase each year so they could plan it versus a major increase so they got walloped by it.
Sure.
And that could happen in the very near future if we continue not to want to have an increase. Every price in America pretty much is going up. Now I did notice that pop dropped, but or soda as they say south. But it's funny that we're not taking into consideration everything that's happening around us.
Right.
We just don't want our city government to hurt us anymore. And I don't think that they are. I think the pain could actually be not doing. Is that an appropriate assumption?
Sure. It's and it's cause and effect. So I'll use fire rescue just as an example. It's obviously what I'm supposed to be the subject matter expert on, and I am. And so instead of you looking at the whole city budget, I'll talk about ours. We work with a financial planner, and for every line item that we have in the budget, we take assumptions of what those are over time, what those will increase. And in a normal economy, you might have on the operations level, it might be a 4 or 5% increase, your operational costs per year. And then, your salary changes for personnel and all those things. And you put all those costs in over a period of time. We do a 10-year forecast. And so we show what our revenue is, and we show what our expenses are. And, when I look at the city's growth, all of those things have estimates. So we have an idea of when we think our next fire station will be, and the station after that, what it takes as far as apparatus, equipment, personnel to do that. So we plug all those numbers into that forecast. And then we look at, okay, well, it's called a revenue sufficiency study. What do our rates need to be able to support that? So we don't have these giant, and the idea is, like you said, you get this little hill climb every year instead of these giant spikes in rates. Well, everything's changed now because, post-COVID and post the pandemic, everything went up so rapidly. What for the fire rescue district could have been a 3 or 4%, small increase every year. It's bigger now. We're looking at, we're going to ask for a not to exceed of 10% this year in the fire rescue rates. We're hoping by the time we get to budget adoption that it could be a little bit less than that. But it's easy because I can plug those things in. I know what my expenses are going to be in the future based on those estimates. Every year we go back and we revisit, what's happened with the economy, whether something went up more than we thought or less than what we thought. We plug that in, and I can see over 10 years with our revenue, intended revenue and expenses, where that line goes. And if you don't do those gentle increases, or don't do those increases when they're needed, exponentially it gets more painful the further out you go. And then you begin to see these lines change where very quickly your expenses surpass your revenues. And so you have one of two things you can do. You can increase your rates, or you can reduce something in your budget. We run a pretty tight budget. Training is a big part of our budget. Personnel is the biggest part of our budget. When you look at the marketplace, we have to be competitive in the marketplace. What we pay our personnel is commensurate with what's in the area. There was a period of time we didn't do that. And so we were kind of bleeding people. So we were actually spending more money. It looked like less per person, but we were spending more money because we were hiring somebody and then they were leaving to go somewhere else, and then hiring somebody, leaving to go somewhere else. And we've solved that problem now, but you get to a point where, what do you cut out of your budget? Do you cut training out? Well, no, that's what makes us exceptional. Our mission statement is provide exceptional public safety services in a safe, compassionate, professional manner. Nobody picks up 911, picks up the phone, calls 911 and says, hey, send me a couple of your average people when they can get here. And, hopefully they can get it done. Their expectation is we're going to get there quickly. We're going to act professionally, compassionately, and safely, and we're going to take care of their emergency in the best manner possible. So if you're not going to reduce some of your expenses, then where do you give? So do you get rid of people? Do you close a fire station? Do you lower your level of service? Do you have less equipment? Do you have less training? And those are the real world issues that we start to deal with on the operational level. And then on the capital side of things, Price Boulevard project, you can go back and blame things of the past on who thinks should have done what, but that was a project that's needed to be done for a long time, and it's a very expensive project. But the amount of money it took to get that started and do some of these other things, now there's not a lot of money left. There's not surtax money left to go and take care of things that have come up for, and that's what the voter referendum was about, was we can't, as a city, we can't borrow money. So how do we solve these problems, in the future? The water issues that are going on, those are mandated. We get fined if we don't fix those. So how do we get the money to do that? If you can't borrow it, what do? Do you cut something else?
I asked you this, and it's actually very true. How do you make money magically appear in your budget? And the answer is you don't. You just figure things out that the citizens, while the citizens had the opportunity to vote, what I think they failed to realize was they were not voting yes or no. These projects, they're not a yes or no. just the water incident. If you take that on the surface, it's the responsibility of paying for it. Did you like the way they wanted to pay for it or not? Because it's going to have to get done.
Sure.
So if you looked at it and said, and we had a commissioner, a wannabe, who really doesn't. He does get it. I think that he said that he would have voted yes, but he didn't trust them. Well, you don't trust them. Trust yourself. Do your own research. Understand what you're voting for, because I think at the end of the day, when you have a conversation with people and you say, well, did you vote yes or no? They say, I voted no. Well, how do you want them to pay for it? Well, they're not doing the project because I voted no. That wasn't the question. The question wasn't yes or no. The question was, how do you pay for it? And if you don't believe that that's the most strategic way of paying for it, where we can, I don't want to call it keep taxes down. How about suppress them as long as we can? How do you work that as a chief of fire now that you've got 5 years running of not doing a millage rate increase? And in good times, bad times, it doesn't matter. We didn't do it. We didn't adjust to the good times, and now we're in kind of some, I don't want to say bad times. I think we're getting some really bad press. Our hurricane situation has hit us at timing wise and taken our tourism dollars away from our area, which we really haven't felt in a long time or ever, other than red tide. But our coastline really does affect Northport, and we're not on the coast.
Of course.
And so you've got travel dollars, you've got tourism dollars, you've got impact of insurance, you've got all these factors, and all of them are costs that are going up. And we're sitting here trying to figure out, is our government being straightforward with us enough or not? And I don't think that was the true answer to the questions. I think people are still stuck on, I told them no, so we're not doing the project. Because everyone I've talked to said I voted no because I don't want them to spend the money on that project. Right. We're mandated on the water, the police department. It's going to have to happen at some point, because we're going to be over 100,000 and we don't have any closets left in the building. So something's going to have to change. It's sort of like your budget. If we don't get ambulances in the near future, we're going to be kicking the can down the road in that regard too. So strategically, you're having this battle with keeping your budget, your personnel, and all the projects that you know that we're going to need in the future when we go over 110,000, which probably is going to happen in 26. How are you managing that? Because it's a huge dynamic.
Well, the one thing I'll say, so we are very blessed, and it's probably multiple facets on that, but we've always been very successful in demonstrating what our needs are, and I clarify that, not what our wants are, but what our needs are. And so I always tell the commission and the community, our level of service is dictated by what our community wants. So if the community decided that they didn't care if it, took 15 minutes to get to a 911 call, then that's the level of service that we would have. But I think we provide a very high level quality service, and that's what the community's come to expect from us. So to maintain that takes certain things. And so, whenever we go through the budget process and we go through all of that, and I think the city manager's done a great job since he came of kind of streamlining that budget process to make it maybe a little bit less painful for us. But whenever there's a question on budget, typically I'm happy to articulate why we ask for certain things or why we need certain things, and what is the consequence if we don't get those things. So that, my belief has always been, have informed consumers. And so I think you're right on the voter referendum. Some of it was people didn't want the project, so they voted no. And some of them maybe, and in their defense, some of them I think were informed consumers, and they just decided they didn't want to do that, come up with Plan B. I think if anything we learned from it is we need to keep our ear to the ground. We need to be listening to the community. We need to be responsive to that. We need to continue to try and educate them, continue to be transparent, continue to show what the needs are to be able to support the city, and understand that, you know, the fire department is just one small cog in the whole wheel, right? And just like everything else, all these other projects, they're one little facet of everything that's going on. All of those things have to come together successfully and work out for us to be going well. You know, fire and police are considered emergency services and public safety, and they are. But if you don't pick the trash up for 3 months, and obviously I'm using, you know, a ridiculous thing, but if you don't pick the trash up for 3 months, suddenly you have a pretty big health issue in the city, and that's public safety. If you don't have clean water, that's public safety. If you're polluting the groundwater, as many wells as we have here in the city, that's public safety. And so all these things, they are kind of interconnected on the things that do and that are important. And just like there's transition of government positions, there's also transition of you know, city leadership positions and different directors and things like that. And so sometimes if something, you know, that I can tell you, fire department, something that maybe was a priority 5 years ago, technology changed or whatever, and we went, oh, that's not relevant anymore. You know, it's, what are we thinking now? You know, the big thing that we're all dealing with now is AI, right? What is AI going to do in each of our industries in all that we do in the future, right?
Massive.
You know, the hope is that we can harness some of it to find efficiencies and do some things that might not necessarily eliminate positions that we currently have, but it might help us find some efficiencies so that as we grow, maybe we don't need quite as many. When I say we, I mean collectively all of us as the city. I still need a certain number of firefighters to put fires out, and a certain number of, you know, EMTs and paramedics to run those calls. But are there efficiencies that can be found so I don't have to maybe grow the administrative staff as much in the future or do certain things? And I think the answer to that is hopefully yes. And how does that apply to all the different parts of the city and the industry? And it's changing daily. So it's, you know, spending time listening to that, being responsive to the community and finding out, and just being transparent. And hopefully the voters, the people that said no, and the people that didn't vote this time or whatever, hopefully they will, you know, listen moving forward, and we'll do a good job, hopefully, of educating them and getting them involved in that process. You know, we have budget hearings. We do those on purpose so people will come out, so we can get some input and some information. And sometimes we don't get a whole lot of participation until the very end when the budget's all formulated and it's ready to be adopted. And that's when people show up. And a lot of times, like, that's not when you make the change, you know, because now you're doing something reactive and not knowing what all the consequences are of certain things. And so it's just educating them, being involved in the process, and knowing that, you know, we're going to try and continue to do the right thing and be responsive, and we'll educate our people, and we're happy to talk to anybody if they have questions anytime.
How close do you think we are right now to reactive? Are we within a real short period of time to be reactive to the budget? Because
one of the analogies I always use when I talk about
5 years is a long time. We're getting ready to, if we do not increase the millage rate, that'll be 6 years running of no millage rate increase. Is there another city around us that's done that?
I don't know. I'm not sure that I'm educated enough to know, but I don't think so. But I'll say we have had the help of growth. Growth does help.
Yes.
We've been growing at a faster rate than some others. But as I said before, growth doesn't necessarily pay for growth, because when we have the explosive growth that we've had, we haven't been able to just take that extra revenue and use it for the same things. There's been an expansion of services to keep maintaining in all areas of the city, to keep maintaining the things that we're doing. It's required more resources. So that growth is good. It's helped pay for the growth of the city to be able to do those things. But it doesn't just keep up with all of that. And so I think that's one of the things, you know, I always talked about, you know, kind of this balloon. If you at budget time, if you don't do a rate increase today because you're just looking at this 1 year. If you think about the cost of everything now, it's more expensive next year. So if you cut something and you hold it off next year, it's going to cost more, and exponentially it could cost even more down the road. And you're squeezing that balloon and you're getting a little bit of relief right now, but you're actually making it bigger as it goes out. And that's why I really like that model that we do. I said we work with the consultant to provide that revenue sufficiency and show what the impacts of decisions that we make today on our rates, how those will impact us in the future. And we've tried to get away from these giant spikes in rates. And as I said, everything's going up so much right now. It's a steady climb, but it's a steady climb at a higher rate than what I would like. But when I open a fire station, I need a minimum of 18 people when I open the station, and that doesn't really account for time off or anything else. And so if I waited and hired all 18 of those people in 1 year, it's this giant spike. So and now I have 18 people that I have to spread throughout the department, which is not super large, all at the same time at that same skill level. So now we hire years in a row so that when the station opens, I brought that last group on in that year. So I have, the first year of people are a lot closer to being a journey worker and they're more skilled. And then the second year is kind of middle. And then I have a new group and we mix them through the department. It's not super impactful. And it makes those rates go up just a little bit at a time instead of waiting and buying, hiring all those same people all at the same time. So
now there's a strategic plan to what you're doing all the way through. And I've talked to you guys enough now during budget time. There's a level of stress that gets added each and every year. I've watched when budget time comes around and the focus is no millage rate increase. It's cut, manage, cut, manage. People talk about the years of experience that we have in our leadership. I got to tell you, if you're trying to nickel and dime a budget, I think you need great leaders with exhausted experience.
Sure.
To do all these things that we're asking of them, and picking on those same leaders that have provided us a 0 millage rate increase for 5 consecutive years. While there's growth here and there's plenty of kudos to be given out or negative in some people's mindsets. We've slowed down on the car parts. We've slowed down on the mattresses. In fact, I think we got rid of one of the mattress stores, so everybody should applaud that, I guess. But, those are all growth items. Those are all things that we should be embracing because our streets are changing with commercial. And that's because of our rooftops, and all these things matter hand in hand. How do you really see the budget for 26 affecting? And I'm not gonna overview the city. I just want to take the fire department. How do you break this down so that the citizens actually understand how strategic you have to be to get your budget in check?
Well, so every year, anything that we're doing that would be considered, so let's use fuel as an example. We have to put fuel in our apparatus every year. It's our call volume goes up a little bit, so there's a little bit of an increase there. But for the majority, that's responsive to what the cost of fuel is, and so we get an estimate of what that is from fleet, and the estimate of what it is today might be different than it is 2 months from now. But we work, those are the numbers that we kind of plug into that budget. And again, as I was saying before, we kind of do that for all of the things that we have. There's an assumed cost increase to certain things. We know what the collective bargaining agreement says for our firefighters. The city, knows what's proposed for cost increases for like the services that we have for general government and things like that. And so we plug all of those things in, and anything that is considered to be a new program or an added cost to the budget, every department has to put together what's called budget proposals. So those budget proposals, if it's a need, we define that as a need and we explain why. If it's a want, and maybe it's an enhanced level of service, we same thing. We explain why, and we say, what's the consequence of not doing that? Well, if you don't have a water rescue program, with all the flooding that we had and things like that, there are the things that we could have done better. And so you start looking and, okay, what more could we have here, resources until we can get outside help and things can we do? So, and then you evaluate that as you go through the budget process and find, is that really a need or a want? And I use that as just a small example, but every one of those things then goes through, the finance department, city manager's department, and then eventually in front of the commission. And usually the first cut of the budget happens here, kind of, staff puts everything together here at the fire department, and we look at it internally, and we cut things. I look at things and cut things, and they hit the floor, and nobody ever sees that. And then when we submit our budget to the city manager's office, finance looks through it, and the city manager looks through it, and they make suggested cuts and things like that. And so typically when we get into the workshop time, they see where a budget that's being presented, where cuts have already been made, certain things have been done. And if it's a very, if it's a significant cut that involves maybe a level of service or something like that, that's highlighted so the commission can have that discussion and make a determination whether or not they want to fund that or not fund that, if it was cut or if it was not cut. And so, like I said, every year we really go through that. It's a painstaking process. It takes a lot more time and a lot more effort than most people would think. It undergoes a lot of scrutiny, and we work very hard at it. I take very seriously, the things that we ask for and things that we need to do to provide the service that we have. And I'm very proud of the level of service that we had for what our budget is. And as I said before, I feel very blessed that whenever we've had a need, we've always been very successful in being able to demonstrate and explain that. And we've been successful in getting that done. That's not true for our wants, and that's okay. And a lot of times we cut our wants without even asking for them during times, when the budget is difficult, because we know it's just not the time to do it. But the one thing we always want to do is try and maintain that level of service that this community has come to expect.
You're talking about level of service, and several sentences back, you talk about cut some things. So level of service and cut don't always go simultaneous with each other in the same paragraph. But this isn't new. This is the same conversation year after year after year for the last 5 years, where I think that where city manager and I agreed 5 years ago or 3 years ago when it came, is that I would rather have a small increase every year, knowing that I'm building in that factor to my budget.
Sure.
Our conversations would be different too to the public, because we wouldn't have this picture of the oh my God moment may happen in the very near future. We have a real problem if property values decrease.
Sure.
And I don't know that everybody says my property's worth more. I'm not happy about it because now I'm paying more taxes. Okay, well, think reverse of that. If you lose property value, don't we lose revenue?
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean that's ultimately a very scary factor that has to play into providing service or cutting service.
Absolutely. And when property values decrease, which has happened in the past, happened 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
And then, the community, the city, our citizens, everybody's forced with difficult questions of what levels of service do we want to reduce? Because we've expanded to support all the things that we have. So property values go down. What are we giving up? Make those things happen. So I think at that time, first thing the city did was they didn't fill, vacant positions. And, 2007, 2008, there was quite a few layoffs in the city that were actual, there were bodies, if I remember correctly. And those are difficult decisions. And then, it took us probably 10 years to get back to what that level of people were again. And we were going through explosive growth. So when people's property values go up, their millage rate stays the same. Yes, their taxes increase. Taxes are a benefit, are paid for a service that's a benefit to people, and assessments are paid for a service that's a benefit to property. So, our budget is half and half. EMS is a benefit to people. It's funded under the ad valorem taxes, and fire assessments, fire service is actually a benefit to property. Those are legal definitions. And so we predominantly I take care of the district side of the budget, and then work with all of our other team members that have a piece of the general fund to help formulate that budget and what our requests are. So there's a lot to it, and when there's a downturn in the economy, it makes a significant difference. And we've seen some unusual things happen. Last year, we were expecting double-digit increases on property values, and building value actually initially came in as a decrease, and then it ended up being I think it was a 1.8% increase. And so that impacted our district rates a little bit, because our tier 2 rate is based on building value, which is different than assessed value. Again, we have to adjust that, and if there's a negative deflection in that, we have to make that up and figure out where that's coming from.
How important do you think it will be after this budget for the citizens to really start diving in? Not that they shouldn't have been before, but I think if we go through year 6 of no millage rate increase, everybody better start be paying attention to what's happening around them for year 7. And that means revenue. I talk about Public Works and what they've done with their recycling program. Well, that's revenue to the city that we did. And we know all should be pounding our chest about that, because we have very few ways that the city makes money back for the citizen. And the transfer station, I look at that, and we have data that actually proved why that was so valuable, and people still said no, and they don't truly understand the cause and effect. I think more of a approach to the budget and the referendums, it's the cause and the effect. It's that they didn't get. It's the, okay, now that we can't do this, how do we get it? Because we have to have it. Because even with Public Works, the transfer station would have saved dollars on wear and tear of vehicles, man hours, truck wear and tear, would have done all those things. And you talk about in your budget the wear and tear on the vehicles, the maintenance, all of those things that go up. They're not staying neutral. So every aspect of what you do to protect us is affected every single year of those 6 years. And we're nickeling, diming our fire department, our Public Works, and I mean this how it sounds, because we truly are nickel and diming it at this point. And what was that? My wife always says it: stop stepping over dollars, or you're stepping over dollars, or you're stepping over pennies to pick up, or you're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we doing that now? I don't know. We're there, but we're getting really close.
We stretch it, I can tell you, and it comes back to trust and relationships. And I always say, regardless of anything else, everybody that works for the city, we're all public servants, especially public safety. We're public servants, and so we need to continue to try and do a better job to listen and establish relationships, and make sure that we establish and maintain that trust. And that's where I said I think we've been very blessed, fire rescue, to have that trust, and I'm always very, very appreciative of that. And I know how delicate that balance can be too. People are hurting in their own pocketbooks because of everything else that's going on, and so all of us, if you go to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're thinking about how do we survive first in our home before we worry about, gosh, I have to pay more to government for something. Nobody loves big government, and the generic term is waste and these things. And so we just have to do a better job and continue to be transparent and open our door and invite people in and have these conversations and establish that trust. And I'm confident that we can do that. We have a good leadership team. We have, commissioners. Obviously, like I said, we had a resounding answer on all the referendums that told us we need to open our eyes and we need to talk a little more. We need to explain better. We need to help people see some things and change some things to be responsive to that. And I think we are still tasked with solving those problems on the things that were voted no. We need to do that, but we need to continue working to explain how we're doing those things and why we're doing those things, so that people know we're all those pieces. Like I said before, people think about public safety and the safety and health of our community being just police and fire, but it really is clean water. It really is, solid waste. It really is all those things are an integral part of maintaining a safe and healthy community. And so it's all interrelated. And I think all we can do is just continue to commit that we're going to do the best job that we can and be transparent and have more conversations. And, I think the city's done a good job of trying to go around to all different locations in the city and have town hall meetings and explain some, and to try and share that information. And, the results of it just show maybe we could have done better. I always say, if I'm frustrated explaining something and somebody's just not getting it, but I know, I'm the subject matter expert and I know that this is something that needs to be done. It's my job, no matter how frustrating or difficult that is, it's my job to try a different way to show it, to continue, pounding that rock, for lack of a better term, and make sure that they know what the consequences of not doing, certain things are. And again, like I said, I'm obviously have a small piece of the whole city as a whole. But if I didn't do a good job of educating the community or our commissioners or our city management team on what our needs were and what the consequence of not getting some of those things, they wouldn't be able to make, the proper decisions. So we'll keep working at it. And obviously I think we can always do better.
Well, you talk about all the citizens that voted. While we can kind of hash over that, there was still a huge percentage of people that didn't bother to vote. This was a really small pool of decision makers. Ironically, they failed, and the people spoke. I love it when people say everybody voted, everybody spoke. No, they didn't. They didn't speak. They didn't vote. We're still at that. I want to say that infancy stage of a city growing. That if there's not a presidential election, we forget how to vote, and it's important. It's important to vote on all voting issues. How do you look at the and the people that voted? I'm not worried about how they voted or why they voted. They voted. I think that's like the statement of the day. They voted. Where are all the people that didn't vote? Where are all the people where are their mindsets? What are they thinking? Were there more people that were rah-rahing for it and just went, I don't have time for it?
Sure.
And I think we have a lot of that. How do we engage in like, if you can answer this question and get it right, you're going to be like hired by everyone. But what's your plan on engaging more citizens? I think that's the topic that we should be talking about for the whole entire remainder of 25, 26, 27? um, how do we engage with them more? Because we're lacking in that.
That's the magic question, because I think we've invested heavily in trying to spend additional time getting out, having meetings in the community, um, trying to put messaging out through multiple different media avenues, engaging in programs like this with you, um, just and trying to be responsive to all of those things. So, the conundrum sometimes is figuring out, when I said, the introspection is when I say we can always do better. People can draw different conclusions from that. Some may draw that we didn't do a good job and we could do better, and some may draw that we did a good job but we could always do better. And that's kind of the way I look at things: is the outcome wasn't what we wanted, so we have to find a way to engage better if we know that those things have to be done. As the fire chief, if I'm failing at getting our message out and we're not successful, I need to find other things. But I think we've exhausted a lot of resources, and we continue to invest in those things to see what can we do differently. And the conundrum is figuring out, what is the majority of people think? This was an off election for as far as it wasn't a presidential election, but even during the presidential election, the voter turnout sometimes you look at and it's somewhat concerning. People do have a voice, and there was a gentleman who ran for commission at one point in time, and he didn't anymore. And I saw, he posted something. He was very, very much in opposition to all 5 voter referendums. And I think it was the night before the voter referendum, I saw him post something, and somebody had gone through and said, "Hey, let me walk you through all the FAQs on the website, and let me talk to you about all those things that you're saying." And all the information was there. And he kind of did a 180, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I read these things, and this is why we need to vote for this. This is why we need to do these things," and went down on every one of those items. And it was a great epiphany for him. But there was a lot of people that they got some information, but maybe didn't have all of it. Didn't maybe understand that they were voting on how to pay for it versus whether it was a yes or a no. Should it be done? Period.
Right.
And there was a lot that went into that. And from the previous referendum, I think some of those issues got confused, and so I think there is a little bit of head scratching on what does the majority think. I certainly think there was a loud voice in this referendum, but is it reflective? Is it reflective of the entire community? Is it reflective of a smaller group? Is it, sometimes when you're in a group, when you're in a room with 10 people and you yell the loudest, you get the most attention, but it doesn't necessarily. Is that reflective of the 10 people, or is that just you were heard the most? And I think those are the things that we need to wade through as we're going through this budget cycle, listening, trying to reevaluate those things. I know the city's, worked on getting some information out, putting out questionnaires, getting some feedback, and trying to do stuff. And, we just try and make sure that we're being responsive to the community, but also still, sometimes my personnel as the fire chief, sometimes they want to do something a certain way. My job isn't necessarily to do just what they want. My job is to educate them and say, can't do what you want, and here's why. Here's the consequences of doing that. I'm making a decision for the group as a whole, not just for 3 or 4 people or 10 people or 15 people that came because they have a concern, when I'm making a decision for 150 some people. So it's a lot to balance, but that's why we have the positions we have, and sometimes it's challenging, but we just have to stay committed and realize that we're here for a reason, and we got to keep working at it.
So we got about 6 minutes left, and I don't want to continue down this road without kind of diverting off here real quick. There's some mental health side of all of these topics. The draining of the brain power that kind of goes into the budget. The draining of personnel, PST, You've got all kinds of things that you deal with. Um, Talk about the mental health hospital and the importance of having that partnership that you feel is going to benefit not just maybe city as a whole, as far as the partnership you guys have formed, but the citizens as a whole.
Well, we're excited. So Acadia Healthcare opened Northport Behavioral Health right here in the city. They opened in January, and they're still expanding their services, but it's the first time that really we have access to a facility like that here directly for us. And so there's a lot of things from a public safety standpoint that it helps with. We have obviously, some of our first responders see and deal with things that the general public doesn't. And over time, that's I'm looking at a question on there, but let me finish this. As our bag gets full, our people have to be diffused, certain calls and stuff like that, talk about it, have resources. And we have peer resource programs and everything else, but it's the first time we've had something here in the city where it's a direct link and availability to do something fast if we have somebody that's in crisis. So for the police department and for us, that's a fantastic benefit. For the general population, sometimes you're going through, you're doing all kinds of things, that bag gets a little bit full. Who do you talk to? How do you do? People ask all the time. You go to your regular doctor and your doctor says, well, I don't know. And they just want to give you a pill or they want to do something. And sometimes you just need somebody to help you unpack that bag a little bit and fill the gas tank with something that brings value to you and gives you a little bit of relief and peace from those things. So we're super excited about the partnership. They're going to help us with some things as far as education goes and resources goes. They're going to work on becoming a provider for our health insurance and for our workers' comp, which is amazing. So we have some exciting stuff on the horizon, I think, with them. And risk, our city risk has been super helpful, and human resources helpful in kind of being the link between police, fire, and that agency. And we're looking to continue to build that. So it's still kind of in its infancy stages now, but it's exciting.
Awesome. So I will say that we had a question from Commissioner Devin McDowell about the tower, and that was directed towards you, but I'll take that instead of you. I will say that working on the tower, and as soon as I have news, you'll hear about it. Other than that, it's a quiet issue for a reason. And we'll talk about the radio station and the tower and the emergency broadcasting at another venue at another time. So as far as that is concerned, we're not going to talk about it. There's nothing to address. There's no need, and we're moving forward. So I appreciate your comment, Debbie. Thank you. But if you have any questions, you can definitely call me. I have no problem talking about it. But as far as the mental health side of it, how valuable do you think that's going to be for the department itself? As you've kind of been through, and I've been through some things, and I know the value because of my background in healthcare and 27 years in working in the hospital environment, including some of the floors that kind of cater to that need. And there's something to be said about embracing that. And back when I was younger, it wasn't so much embraced like it is today.
Right.
Can you kind of highlight that real quick? We've got a couple minutes left.
Yeah. So dealing with difficult calls and things like that is something that years ago we just didn't really talk much about. It was supposed to be, this is the job that we do, this is what we signed up for. And so some people would bottle that up, and as I think everybody knows, we're all wired differently. And so how something that may affect you on a certain day might affect me differently. It may affect me more profoundly. It might be my first day, it could be my 30th year, and we just don't know sometimes what causes those triggers or what causes something to weigh heavily on us. Sometimes it's a buildup over time, and that's the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Sometimes it's just helping before somebody gets in crisis, is helping have the availability of somebody to help us recognize those things. And so the first part, whenever we have a call, we have certain calls that have criteria that get put into the system that alert kind of our team that we've had a certain type of call. We do an immediate, what's called a diffusing on scene afterwards, and then decide if we need to do a debriefing later. But we talk about the call, we let everybody express how they feel, make sure they do that as a group, and then, avail resources to them. And then we have this process where we check back in. Do we need to do a more formal debriefing after that? Do we need to involve other healthcare professionals? We have people that will come in and help. Acadia would be one of those resources that we have. And then we have, of course, some people that are trained internally, and even partnerships throughout the departments here in the area where we'll go help each other if it needs to be somebody from an outside agency. It helps sometimes with a little bit of anonymity, I guess, for them to be able to come in and talk to a group. So to have those resources available, and then there's benchmarks of when we should be checking in on those people that were involved in those calls. And, after a certain period of time, if it's still weighing heavily on them, it's kind of, there's some clinical indicators that might need to go see somebody to help you unpack that a little bit instead of, continuing to carry it around so that it doesn't become burdensome later. And, we all have our past life too, how we were brought up, how we were raised, trauma that we had as a child, or, if we were in the military, or if we had certain exposure to things, it makes you, again, more prone or maybe less prone to certain things. And so because we're all different, there's no magic answer on when somebody needs help or if they need help. And so, the constant reinsurance for us is we try to be very proactive, reaching out, be very proactive in making sure that our personnel know resources available. We're not there to solve their problem. We're there to connect them to resources, talk about it, and go through things. And just kind of reminding them. And it's one of the things that we do talk about often now, so that people are aware. There's not this taboo that you have to bottle it all up, because that's really the worst thing you can do. Sometimes people just need to talk about it a little bit. And just by talking about it, it helps alleviate, helps unpack that bag a little bit, lighten the load, so they can manage it further. A lot of first responders don't go home and talk to their families because the things that we see, our families don't understand, and we don't want to expose them to those types of things. So if we don't have those resources availability of being able to talk to each other at a peer-to-peer level or somebody to go to, some people just get really quiet, and you keep that stuff inside, and it can become very damaging to you. So it's providing alternative avenues if you don't have that support system at home or whatever, and then providing education too, so that our spouses and families know, hey, if you see something different at home, reach out to one of the fire family members and say, hey, firefighter so-and-so, my husband's been acting a little different. Is everything okay at work? Have you noticed anything or whatever? And kind of keep everybody involved. So,
that I remember vividly having this conversation with you when this partnership kind of formed.
Okay.
You were off the chain excited. Are you still that way today?
I am, absolutely. Because the more you can do, I can tell you, just since the first time that we've talked, there's been some very, very nationally known, some foundational people in the fire service that were advocates for this type of program that have committed suicide since that time. Two major public officials that were, pioneers in trying to handle and deal with this stuff that here in Florida that have killed themselves since that time. And everybody struggled with, well, gosh, they knew all the things that we know that we're advocating for. They knew all these things, and yet they still succumbed to this, and nobody saw it coming. And so it's a very real thing, and when you talk about not just public safety, but our military veterans, the rate of suicide it's alarming and
massive.
Why is that? I'd like to do a scientific research study. I will tell you, if you look at the 1970s and look at the general level of testosterone in men and what was considered in the normal range, and you look at it now, it's drastically different. It's significant points lower than what it used to be. Why is that? It's the food that we eat, the processing, the stress that we undergo, and everything else. And I feel like that has to be something that I think personally is contributory. I don't have a scientific link to it. I've been talking to some people about maybe seeing if we get some people involved in research. But, in the 70s, not everybody loved firemen and policemen because they were a little bit more gruff, and they shrugged some of that stuff off, and they let it bother them maybe outwardly. And maybe there's something to be said for that. Maybe there's more than just environment. Maybe there's a physiological reason why. And I don't know. I wish I knew all those answers. But I will tell you, we're committed to continuing to work on those things, provide those resources for our team. And it never feels like you can do enough. And certainly if you've ever lost anybody on your team or somebody that's close to that, whether it's a first responder or not, you suddenly understand how important have those resources are and have the availability of an ear to listen at your time of need and what you need. And sometimes that's all people need. I tell everybody, I don't care if you know me, 24/7, 365, you pick up the phone and call me, like I will answer the phone, because nobody should ever feel like they don't have anybody. And that's the scariest thing, I think.
So I will close with this: we got to talk for 20 minutes before the show, and we really didn't talk content about the show, but the mental health help that you provided me prior to the show was far beyond anything that I expected, but it was everything that I thought you were. I just didn't know the value of our conversations over the years. So I want, first off, I want to say thanks. Second off, I also want to say thanks for being part of the valued leadership of our city and taking care of the people who take care of us the most, which is the firefighters, the first responders. They are valuable. They save lives, and that's not to take anything away from the police department here locally. But you're on the show. They were on last week, and I feel the same way about them that I feel about you and your team. And it takes a great coach. It really takes a great coach to lead, and that's my sports analogy for what you do, because you are a huge asset to the organization in forging ahead, and through the budgets, through everything, and keeping yourself 60 pounds lighter, I think.
Yes, yeah, See, a little over 60, but I had it coming.
So there's something to be said about all that, and I just want to say thank you, and I hope the citizens feel the same way. Debbie McDowell commented a few times in there, and I left her post up, and truthfully, I know that she knows how big of an asset you are to the community. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, she was always great to our team, and I can tell you that the honor is not lost on me of my position and things that I'm honored to do and be able to do for the city and for our personnel. They really, really do a great job every day out there, and thank you for your compliment. But that's what friends do, and just having a conversation sometimes, and you don't know when somebody needs that and how much it means. But as I told you before, we've all, I think, had those seasons in life, and it's nice to know. So I guess the last message for today is to anybody that's listening is pick up the phone and reach out when you're struggling and have a difficult time. Don't think that somebody's not there to answer, because I promise people would rather pick up the phone and speak to you than hear about something that's happened and feel like they wish you had reached out. So
I agree. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thanks for the listeners for being part of it. Please share and like the video. It is very important to get this information out to all the citizens so that they're engaged and know what's going on. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, John.
Have a blessed day.
You too.